Now I'd like to welcome our next speaker, Daria Gutnick. She is CEO of Bunch. She'll be introducing our next panel, which is entitled Building and Rebuilding Trust in Your Company. Join me in welcoming Daria.
Hi, everyone. How are you today? My name is Daria, and I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of a company called Bunch. Before we get into it, I wanted to ask you a question. Who here is in the people or HR space? So who leads a people function? Awesome. Great, welcome. Who of you guys believes that trust is at the cornerstone of what you're building at your organization? Great. I didn't see all hands. I was kind of ready. So I digged into some data for you to convince the skeptics that trust is something we all should care about. So when I was digging into facts, I found 3 things. First, psychological safety, which is a phenomenon that happens in a team, and there's a lot of nodding, that's great. A concept coined by Amy Edmondson, professor at Harvard, is a fact or a situation or a feeling that happens in a team when people are not afraid to fail. So when you trust your coworkers and your bosses to actually not punish you when you make mistakes, is the #1 predictor of team effectiveness and team performance if we trust Google's reworks research. Another factoid that I found very interesting by a study conducted by Great Place to Work was that companies where trust is significantly higher from employees to senior leadership actually outperform the market when it comes to stock price returns by 300%. And third, last but not least, a study conducted by Interaction Associates found that companies that were coined as trust leaders, so where trust were significantly higher than in other companies, actually had a chance of 2.5 times higher to be placed in a high-performant revenue growth category. So they were growing their revenues 2.5 times higher than actual average of the market. What do we learn from all of this? Well, trust is not only a thing that we enjoy when we build relationships. It actually pays real money. How many of you now, knowing all of this and freshen up the insights, wonder what the level of trust is in your organizations? I'm not going to ask for a raise of hands. Bunch AI is a platform that offers a way to look into the deep insights of an organization, how it ticks, and provides cultural KPIs such as trust based on what we call digital exhaust data. So we tap into Slack, Microsoft Teams, Jira, Google Calendar, and other tools that team members use on a daily basis to notice and play back to you what goes well and what goes wrong, so that you can take action when, for instance, trust in senior leadership starts deteriorating. Now, the question that is really in the room is not so much whether trust is low and high. Once we know what the levels of trust are, we still have the big job to do of finding out how we can actually build it. I'm really, really excited about the panel that comes up right now, because that panel has the question to answer: how can we build and rebuild trust, not only internally in our organizations, but also externally with the market, with our customers, with our business partners? I'm very humbled to be introducing the moderator, who is Damian Slattery. He is the VP of Marketing at Fast Company, an exciting place to work. However, that's not the most exciting part about him. In the past 10, 15 years, he has worked in executive roles at companies like The Times, The New Yorker, Fortune, and Sports Illustrated. And I'm really, really excited to listen what the panel comes up with in terms of questions and answers that we are all seeking. How can we build trust easier? I'm really excited to welcome the panel.
Thanks. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. I'm Damian. Moderator this morning. I've got Colleen Devery from NAF on my right, Howard Sherman of Good 360, and Katherine Hand of HP. So we're going to dive right in. I think this topic is just about the most critical one at play today in business, whether that's issues of transparency, issues of marketing, issues of building a strong company, whether you're a startup, a legacy enterprise, you name it. And we've got a great mix of voices and expertise and backgrounds here to tackle that. Just yesterday in Cannes, Edelman released its 2019 In Brands We Trust study. You should all look it up if you really are into trust, and you all should be into trust. One of the key findings is that trust is critical to buying. But I think it's also critical to building a culture and building a relationship. And I want to ask each of the panelists to just touch on broadly how critical trust is to your role and to your organization, and whether that's consumer, employee relationship, what have you. Colleen, why don't you start us off?
Sure. So at NAF, we work with school districts and businesses around the country to create career-themed academies where high school students are learning about a particular industry, and then they're experiencing the workplace. They're going into businesses, business people are coming into their schools, and they do paid internships. So the place where, all of it comes together in a really high-stakes way for us is when the students are going into those internships. So this summer, about 8,000 students around the country are going into corporations, HP, Verizon, places all around the country. And, they're going to have an experience that is going to be transformational to the way they think about work, the way they think about businesses and their community. And there has to be a high level of trust between the school, the business partner, that they each are doing their job to make sure that the student is ready, the student's going to have a great experience. And when there's a problem, there's a trust that they all can fall back on to solve that. When there might be a conflict between the way each of them are playing their roles.
I want to come back to that from early experience in my career to today, if not yesterday. Howard.
Sure. So my organization is Good 360, and Good 360 is an organization that works now with 400 of the world's biggest companies, including the Amazons, the Walmarts, the CVSs of the world. And we work with them to help manage in a responsible way the redistribution of excess and returned goods and move those goods to a captive network of now over 70,000 nonprofits. So those nonprofits are resource starved, and being able to harvest goods from companies like Amazon or Walmart that are critically needed for whether it's disaster relief or recovery, or whether it's a homeless shelter or women's shelter or a vocational program for people coming out of the judicial system or what have you, is what we do. And we're about to hit our $10 billion mark of product moved through our system from those companies. So it's a pretty scaled operation. And what's interesting, Damian, as it relates to trust, and I've got a few colleagues here, is we talk about this all the time inside of our organization and with our stakeholders, that trust is actually the foundational glue that makes this organization work. We move in excess of $350 million worth of product a year from companies who trust us to be stewards of that excess inventory. They're donating that product to us so that we can in turn redonate that product to nonprofits. And they're trusting us to make sure that that product is ending up in the hands of people who need that product from a social and/or disaster kind of circumstance, as opposed to being remarketed on a secondary marketplace. My nonprofits, on the other hand, are absolutely dependent on us as a resource for the kinds of products they need on a consistent basis that they can resource on a donated basis. And so we're building trust on both sides of our value chain. And if we let our nonprofits down because we don't have the flow of products, that's a breach that not only interrupts our relationship, it actually impacts lives, right? Because the work they're doing is critical work, whether it's refugee work or any variety of things. So for us, trust is foundationally, what we are built on as an organization. We cannot do what we do without having trusted relationships with our corporate partners on one side, as well as our nonprofits, as well as stakeholders that are influencer stakeholders in our ecosystem.
Thanks, Howard. Katherine.
I'm Katherine Hand. I'm with HP, and I sit inside of our sustainability and social innovation team. So our team sets the strategy and the communications for environmental and social topics across HP. It's an incredibly exciting time to be at HP. I've worked with the company for about 6 years now, and in the last year, I think in part because of feedback we've gotten from the marketplace, the investment from the company into our environmental and social topics has just skyrocketed. In part, I think this is because increasingly action on environmental and social topics is critical to brand trust from employees, from customers, and investors. Just a couple of stats that are always sort of in our mind as we think about the importance of our work. The Edelman Trust Barometer, which is another great publication that Edelman puts out, said that 75% of people, for 75% of people, their relationship with their employer is their most trusted institutional relationship. So above NGOs, government, and business writ large. And those employees increasingly expect their employers to take a stand on societal issues and really demonstrate a commitment to a broader purpose. The same holds for consumers, as you pointed out. So 67% of consumers will buy based on reputation, but they will stop buying if they do not come to trust you as a company. So essentially, if your performance doesn't match up to your reputation, they will stop purchasing from you, which is obviously a huge concern for a company like HP. And then the last thing I'll just share is that from an investor point of view, between 40 and 80% of a company's market cap is based on intangible assets, including your reputation, and increasingly your stand on environmental and social issues. So for us, this is not sort of a nice to do and an add-on. This is a business critical piece of what we do. And for me, so my role is specific to communications. I think a lot about how we communicate out about our programs and our progress in a really transparent way, including when we don't sort of meet our goals or we're not moving in the direction we want to. How do we own up to that and really explain that and show the marketplace that we're trying to move in the right direction?
Katherine, I want to stay with you for a second. One of the headlines out of this Edelman report was consumers basically calling BS on trust washing. That's has echoes back to greenwashing of a decade or so ago when everyone was messaging green. How does the framework of now is we've got Boeing, we've got VW, we've got Wells Fargo and others, trying to come back from challenging moments with trust at the center. How do you overcome that? How do you make it, does it have to really be part of your purpose rather than just something you say? Is it something you do? Talk about that in terms of HP and your experience.
Sure. Absolutely. I think trust is reinforced by your actions and by your communications. So HP, our CEO likes to refer to HP as Silicon Valley's designated driver. Which, frankly, I think for a long time made us sort of, people didn't think of us as cool or hip or interesting. But in a day like today, when Silicon Valley and lots of other corporates are sort of under the microscope, and several have had missteps, that is one of our biggest assets. And so this idea of trust and of our reputation as the designated driver, the company that does the right thing because it's the right thing to do, is critical. One thing I'll say, so today our sustainable impact report comes out, it just came out this morning. And that is one key place where we talk about some of our key topics, environmental and social topics. And you will see in that report that over this last year, our carbon footprint went up. And we don't shy away from talking about that. It's front and center in the report. We talk about why that happened and what we're doing to address that. And I think small things like that, everyday actions really show, we're not just here for the pretty headlines, we're doing the hard work to kind of live up to our purpose.
Howard, there's a phrase you use, and we talked about it on the side, mutualism. Could you explain for the audience what what's really underlying that, and how that is a worthy ambition for companies of all scopes and sizes.
Right, and I sometimes get in trouble when I talk about this, but I came from the private sector, and I was running a very large global marketing and advertising firm until about 3 years ago. And Good 360 was on my radar screen because one of my big clients was on the board, and there were changes there. One of the board members actually ran for president. She didn't win, yet. And so, as I looked at the organization and what Good 360 was all about, on one hand, it's a commercial operation in the sense of we're working with the biggest companies in the world to help them manage a really complex and expensive challenge. And on the other hand, we're working with nonprofits to help them deliver on their mission. And the organization had had a few near-death experiences along the way. It's been around for a while. But one of the things I pointed out to the board and to the leadership was, one of the things that's kind of feels wonky to me is that you're a social enterprise more than you're a nonprofit, and yet you work on a model that's based on pure altruism, as does most nonprofits. Good 360 is a nonprofit. When in fact, there's a principle around mutualism where everybody in your stakeholder chain benefits from the work we do collectively as an ecosystem, which helps move you away from being reliant on an altruistic model for how you support yourself and how you build yourself, which by definition tends to be fragile, to a model that has more durability and has more ability to build broader relationships. So I'm a big advocate, particularly in the NGO world, in the nonprofit world, but also in the private sector, that when you think about trust, it's really about how do you move from a transactional relationship to a transformational relationship, and introducing the idea of mutualism as opposed to transaction in the private sector, or in the NGO nonprofit sector, altruism. So to me, it's about where's the mutual benefit for everybody involved, right? And I will say this, this panel is about building trust. I actually think that building trust is about doing trustworthy things. And if you're doing trustworthy things with the people that you're engaged with, trust is built. If we don't have a task force in the organization about how do we build trust. We have a set of principles about doing trustworthy things with everybody that's important to us, our employees, our nonprofits, as well as our corporate partners. Before I come to you, Colleen, I just want to make a couple points on what Howard just said. So if you have not read it and you're into the thing of trust, Stephen M.R. Covey's book, The Speed of Trust, is an absolute roadmap to building trust, the value of trust, how trust is an accelerant to success. The concept of mutualism. I have been in siloed organizations. You need some mutualism in siloed organizations. Otherwise, you're in competition and trust breaks down. And in the breakdown of trust, you lose money, you lose time, you lose everything. So it's a critical thing, and Stephen M.R. Covey's book makes a great case for that. Colleen, when we talked in advance of this panel, and I learned a little bit more about NAF, it came to mind that so much of education doesn't deal with kind of the software of the work world. Trust is not on any school's curriculum.
Well, it is on some schools.
Is it? They should be celebrated and recognized. But how do we instill that? How are you instilling it? Just by exposing kids to the professional world at such a young age where issues of trust are paramount?
Sure. Well, there's two ways that we do that. And, that is the way that we approach developing all young people's skills as they think about their career. So there's what happens in the classroom. One of the most popular courses that we developed with Ernst & Young, is a ethics course. And we have most of our academies focus on IT or health sciences, engineering, really high growth, high wage industries, but the ethics course cuts across all of those sectors. And so there are tons of schools out there. We have about 110,000 students around the country. So they are studying ethics in the classroom, but then they're really thinking about what that looks like in life. So when they go on job shadows, when they go and visit companies, they bring that lens to it. They do a project in that course where they're really examining what ethics mean to an individual, what they mean at the company level, and how those things interact. So they're prepared to really act on that and also have that expectation of the places where they work.
Does ethics equal trust, or what's the divide between those two? If there is one, is trust the real world and ethics is theoretical? How does one connect the dots for those young people?
Sure. I mean, I think it's a component of that. You know, they know that they're being entrusted as they come into the workplace, when they go into those internships, to contribute. And that's one of the things that, you know, as we talk to students when they're done with their internships, that's always the biggest takeaway for them, is that they were able to act as professionals in those workplaces. So having a framework that includes the way that they act responsibly and the way that they should expect other people to act is an important component of that.
That's great. Maybe this is more Howard and Katherine. In the messaging of trust in advertising, in product building, in this era of incredible transparency, for better or worse, why do we trust influencers and perhaps more than the core company? Why do we accrue or give over trust to influencers?
That was a good question. So for us, when I think about influencers and some of the work that we do, so we have a big initiative to source ocean-bound plastic for inclusion into our products. We actually just today launched our new goal that we're going to increase recycled content to 30% across our print and personal systems products. Breaking news right now. And for us, I mean, we have the resources lined up behind that goal. We have built a long history, over 20 years of doing that work in recycled plastics. But it was really important for us to obviously work with partners and influential partners who also have their own track record and kind of respect in this space. Last week, we co-sponsored the Museum of Plastic here in New York. I don't know if anybody was able to join that. Sponsored by Lonely Whale. And Lonely Whale is a huge influencer in this space in ocean plastic. And honestly, I mean, for us, they ask us hard questions, and they call us when we're trying to, or maybe stepping out a little too far ahead of the programs that we have in place, and they pull us back. So for us, it's important for us to partner with influencers who have real authenticity in the space. So I wouldn't say we should trust every single influencer, but for us, it's really important to align ourselves with those that kind of bring that track record.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would say that, to me, the biggest underlying thing is kind of the crash of confidence in institution, right? And whether it's a business, whether it's government, whether it's even a nonprofit, institution tends to disappoint us. Institutions tend to disappoint us over and over and over again. And I think when I think about influencers, I think about influencers as an extension of peer-to-peer relationships, right? And you mentioned the word, authentic influencers. I think that in the influencer world, we get to know that person through how they speak socially, how they engage socially. And I think we morph from having kind of an unknown relationship with someone we don't know as an influencer to viewing them as a peer if we accept what we view their authentic self. And we trust our peers more than we trust institutions. So, and I think it's a slippery slope, right? Because there are many influencers that are doing amazing things and very productive things. And then there are many influencers that are doing it for different kinds of goals, like making money, and are willing to kind of say whatever they need to say and build whatever relationships they want to build by virtue of doing that. But I think an extension of that is, as an institution then, how do you become a trustworthy institution? And this is old news, but I think it's still relevant news, which is, I talked earlier about, building trust is about doing trustworthy things. So you do trustworthy things in good times, but the things that really make you stand out is by doing trustworthy things when you're challenged. I look at the Wells Fargo disaster and I watch it unwind, and they continue to do things that just feel deceitful. So they're not helping themselves, right? Versus organizations that when they do have issues, and by the way, our organization has issues from time to time with our stakeholders, and the first thing we do is say, what do we need to do to make this right? Not how is it going to impact the organization. We consider that, but we're always about how do we have a trustworthy response to something that went bad? And that is actually the most powerful tool to building enduring trust, is when the shit hits the fan, excuse that fancy marketing word, I used to be an ex-marketer, when the shit hits the fan, it's what you do as an organization to deal with that is the biggest opportunity to actually increase the level of trust you have with whatever stakeholder that event happens with.
Well, I appreciate that, Howard. In our title of our panel, we've got "And Rebuilding" in parens up there, and I think of we've mentioned a couple of the companies that have had big issues, but you also have smaller things that can happen off the radar. My eye was drawn to a story about the North Face recently, where a marketing manager in, I think, Brazil had the clever idea that backfired. He or she figured out how to hack Wikipedia and replace all the outdoors pictures with North Face branded pictures. It didn't go well for them. But it was one person making a wrong call. Maybe it didn't go up the chain. But how do you recover from even something like that, that just in our age of social and immediacy and transparency, something like that becomes maybe much larger wrinkle for them than it could have or should have been. How do you rebuild or recover from even the small moments internally and externally? Colleen, are you guys, kids make so many mistakes. They're learning to recover, right?
Yeah,
how do you deal with it?
It's an important thing to demonstrate to them. I mean, the thing that comes to mind for me is we work in school districts all around the country, mostly urban school districts, where a lot of times when they're looking to start an NAF Academy, they might not be viewed positively within their business community. The business community might not trust the school district to deliver really well-prepared young people. And what we help the schools do is really rebuild that relationship and do it by bringing the business community into the school. So it's not, we try to help them make sure that the conversation isn't like, let us prove it to you, but more, let's do it together.
Rebuilding, Katherine?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll go back to the transparency point. I think transparency is a critical pillar of trust.
So if you make a mistake, you've got to be transparent.
Own up to it, and explain the reason why and what you're going to do about it. I mean, I think it's as simple as that. I think we've seen, see politicians doing the opposite all the time, right? Dissembling, moving to a different topic, but what you really want is a straight answer. I think that's the most critical.
We're going to open it up to questions in about 5 minutes. So if you have trust-oriented questions, get them ready. It's an incredible topic, I think. Early in my career, my first job, in fact, I just saw no trust at all from the top leader on down. And I was frightened by it. I remember literally having goosebumps, not knowing how to deal with things, and I had not learned it. And Howard, we were just talking about how trust is core to just the act of sales. I don't know how many people out here are in sales, but building relationships, trust is at the core. But those relationships have to start and be solid in your company first.
Yep.
before you can even open the door and go out, make a call, send an email, what have you. How either in your current roles or in your careers, how have you seen or dealt with personally the building of trust from within? Colleen, experiences?
Yeah, sure. I think it's the theme that we keep coming to is, really the mutuality of kind of the goals and the commitment to that. One person can't build trust within a company. One company can't, make themselves trusted within a community without participation from other
But do you have trust workshops? I mean, what do you do? Is it the trust board, the trust weekend? What is one? How does it manifest itself in a day-to-day way?
I mean, I think it's about the transparency of motivations a lot of times, right? I think I was thinking about that when you were talking about mutualism and, really the relationships, the partnerships that stand the test of time. We have some schools that have been around for 40 years. And when that happens, it's because they're really authentic relationships within them. And there are things that are going to happen that go the wrong way. But when there's a real clear and open transparency about what's in it for each actor, then you can resolve those issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Howard? So how many people in the audience have been involved with the nonprofit, either at the board level or in some kind of leadership role? A whole bunch of you. So I'm going to talk about two quick stories. For those who've been involved, depending on the nonprofit, one of the things I found coming out of the private sector, moving to the nonprofit sector, is that we had this incredible group of employees and associates at Good 360 who were 80 to 100% mission-based, right? It was all about the good we were doing. And here comes a private sector guy who came from a $9 billion, public company. And I'm going to impose some private sector discipline to the organization so that we can get bigger and better at what we do.
Are you saying no one trusted you?
So the very first thing was nobody was on board. I mean, I'm not generally a dislikable human being. Jim might disagree. But nobody was on board because they thought I was going to wreck it. They thought I was going to wreck the model because I didn't understand the mission of the organization. And I totally understood the mission of the organization, but I had this incredibly strong belief that, there's this old saying, no margin, no mission, right? If you don't have a sustainable business operation, a sustainable financial model, you can't grow your impact, you can't grow the scale of the organization, you can't deliver on the mission at a greater level, and in fact, you become very fragile. So my first challenge was to build trust within the organization that we weren't ever going to lose sight of the mission, and mission first always, but that by bringing some discipline and bringing some focus on financial stability and talent development, that these were things that were going to enable the mission as opposed to distract from the mission, right? So, and that happened with, weekly meetings and one-on-ones and a lot of transparency in what my vision was for the organization and kind of an open dialogue so that people could help move from being on the fence to helping me co-create that vision. So that was one big challenge. And it probably took a year and a half before I would say, we become an organization that everybody that's there, I think, we do a weekly pulse on how people are feeling about a variety of questions. That was an earlier panel today. But people love working there. And they love the fact that we're doing more things today than we did last year and a whole lot more. We're 45% bigger in terms of the size of the organization and the impact of the organization. So that was, I knew that was going to be a long-term thing. And then there's the micro stuff. So yesterday I get an email and the subject matter is, I need to share this with you. So if someone says, I want to share this with you, it means they've done something good and they want credit for it, and they should get credit for it. If they say, I need to share something with you, that means you're about to open an email that has a problem associated with it, right? And so I open the email and there's an employee, he's talking about, we've someone that has been really rattled by a strategic decision we made that we did not transparently share with that employee, and she's worried about her job. And my response was, I get it, and we blew it. We made the decision on Friday. It's Tuesday. We haven't communicated clearly to the organization. She feels at risk. We've got to deal with that now. And within 3 hours, there was a conversation with her that included me, and it was escalated to me as well as her direct report to kind of talk about why we made that strategic decision. It actually impacted her compensation directly, and we guaranteed her compensation wouldn't be impacted by this decision at all, and that we would sort out how we redeploy that person for the long term. So those are the little things inside an organization. And one of the things in her response that was so meaningful was, thank you so much for not letting me sit for a day with this, right? So when I talk about doing trustworthy things, whether they're little or they're big, I think, every day, you wear trust, particularly if you're leading an organization, on your shoulders as a responsibility. It's as important as the P&L, it's as important as the mission, it's an underpinning, and you can't take it for granted. And if you react to situations without a philosophy around how you're going to deal with it, a core philosophy, you're kind of making it up as you go, and that's a problem.
Katherine.
Yeah, no, great points. I think as you were talking, I was just sort of thinking that, my team managing our environmental and social goals and strategy sort of comes from a different point of view from where you sit. So, and I've worked for many other companies in the past. I used to be a consultant, consult to lots of big brands. And I think for a long time, there's been kind of skepticism, some may say distrust from kind of the core business when the sustainability folks come calling, right? It's going to result in more cost. I don't really know what you're talking about, a disinterest to engage. And as I mentioned at the top, this past year at HP, has been a sea change like I've never seen, with the business embracing sustainability in a way that is just incredible. Again, HP has been doing this since the beginning. This was a core value since the founding, but I think what has really changed is we have started to build trust with those sort of business critical pieces of our organization, the heads of our print personal systems business, by talking their language. So instead of talking to them about sustainability, talking to them about customer loyalty, talking to them about talent engagement, and how we can be an asset to them. So I think another critical piece about building trust is obviously building relationships, but also speaking the language of the audience that you're trying to build trust with. Not asking them to go the extra mile, but you actually going the extra mile to make the case for them.
Great. Please, if you have a question, raise your hand now and let's start. There's somebody in the back who has a question. Wait for the mic.
Hi, Rosemary. Thank you for your insights, first of all. My question is really around, as you all know, most industries are going through mergers and acquisitions at numerous levels, and there's a lot of distrust, especially when you're an acquired company. Can you speak to how to handle that from the top, as well as from the middle, as well as from the bottom up?
I just reread Stephen Covey's part of the book in anticipation of this. I'd read it years ago. And he actually has a case study of himself merging his company with another company from Stephen Covey company to Covey Franklin. And even in an enterprise like that, no one trusted him as the leader coming on, akin to what you mentioned, Howard. So do you want to take that one?
I'll give you a really short answer. Someone way smarter than me a long time ago said, when I was back in my advertising world, we were merging companies, buying companies. I was moving around, so you became the new leader. And what this person said to me is, when you become the leader of a new organization, or you merge, or you have some kind of consolidation, there's two approaches. You can either look for what's broken and fix it, or you can look for what's working and leverage it. He said, the look for what's broken and fix it approach is fast, it's disruptive, and it takes a long time for people to recover. looking for things that work and leveraging it. The things that don't work will ultimately drift away. It takes a little bit longer, but it's much more enduring, and people are going to follow you a lot further. So I think that that's an interesting kind of framework to think about mergers and acquisitions. And from a leadership point of view, am I going to come in and find everything that's wrong and cut it out as quickly as possible? That's not really a trust-doing kind of event, right? But if I'm celebrating the things that work, I take the time to understand what's working, and I celebrate that, and I look at the weak spots, and I try to make those weak spots stronger spots. And if they ultimately don't work, they just understand they don't fit, and they move away, which isn't always possible in a public organization. I get it, but I think it's an interesting philosophy.
Any other question? Right here. If we can get the mic way up front, or I can repeat your question.
I've got a pretty big voice.
There we go. That's a good voice.
Thanks, Patrick. I'm with the Outer Borough Media. When companies take stands to either build credibility or trust on political hot-button issues, how do you recommend they handle that? Is it a blanket yes or no, or is it dependent upon the company and how they want to be perceived by the people that they're trying to earn the trust from?
Great question. That's one of my questions on my cards here. Excellent. Thank you for that. And for those who didn't hear it, how did companies deal with hot button issues?
I can start. So this is very relevant to what I do, sustainability and social impact communications. And there's been no shortage of tough issues, particularly over the last year and the last several years, that companies are asked to respond to. I think what we always try and keep foremost in our mind is this in line with our values? Is this business critical? So what are the issues that will impact our business? And do we have something unique to contribute to the conversation? So we try not to, we're not trying to back away from any issues, but I think a core piece of having authentic communications is having those pillars, right? Why is HP taking a stand on climate change? Well, we see it as a long-term business risk. Why is HP investing in refugee education? Because we have the technology and we have great partners and we think we can make a huge impact in that area. So I think for us, it's just critical to really think about how it's authentic to our business. And that's sort of where we start.
Anybody else? Questions? Following up on that one, Katherine, and for any of you really, is all reputation local? Or has it become instantly global? And because of our media world of now?
I think more global than local. It's both, and as a follow-on, I think you're spot on, Katherine, in terms of if you're going to take a stand on an issue, it needs to be in alignment with what the authentic self of that organization is. One of the most impressive stories I've heard recently about this was after the Parkland shootings, school shootings, the CEO of Bob's Sports, who's an amazing guy, made a decision. He went to his board and he made a decision. He said, we're going to remove all automatic weapons from our inventory that we sell. And, gun control is a big issue. I get it. I don't want to be super controversial here. But this guy was making $1 billion revenue decision on his business on the basis of his own values that he wanted to convey through the organization. And I think that's an amazing story and it's an amazing statement. And I think it takes a brave person to do that.
We're close to wrapping up. I just wanted to make a point in Fast Company and all that we write about, we emphasize the word fast, that through innovation, we're moving faster than ever. And I think you've heard today how trust is, I think you called it the glue or foundational, Howard, to speed today. With trust, purpose, and mission, you can be so much faster if those things are clear. In your department, in your little team, in your company, it just ladders up. But back to the Rosemary's question, should we give trust first? Is giving it? Or do you have to wait for it to be earned by that person, that client, that customer, that vendor? Where are we in that world, in your world of mutualism? It has to start somewhere, or
Yeah, I think it's a long tail. I mean, we all have our social friends, and if you guys are like me, I've got some friends that are the people I call at 3 a.m. when I've got some mega issue going on in my life, and I've got other friends that I'm happy to have a drink with on a Saturday night, right? And so there's a continuum, right, in relationships, whether they're personal or professional relationships, based on a lot of things, but trust being kind of core to that. And I don't think it happens overnight. I think it's every day you have an opportunity to build trust by doing trustworthy things. And if you live your life or run your company that way, then it comes, but it's not a switch.
Let me say, I had not met any of you before, but I would trust you inherently with my children, my dogs, or my career. So thank you very much, Katherine, Howard, and Colleen.
Thank you.